Welcome everyone to Engage in Trade. This session is going to be on tariffs and the USMCA. We are happy to welcome you to this event. My name is Susan Spitz, and I am the Manager of International Business Development here at the World Trade Center of St. Louis. And thanks for joining us for this timely discussion. We have two speakers for you today. Our main presenter is a true expert on trade agreements, and specifically the US-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement, better known as USMCA. And we'll also have a special guest who will report about what his company has been seeing at the northern and southern US borders. So just a few housekeeping rules to let you know about. All participants will be muted for the duration of the presentation, but if you wish to ask questions, please do so using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. There is a chat button and a Q&A button. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom, sort of on the right side of your screen. We will do our best to get to those at the end of the presentation. And the slides and a recording, including all the links from this presentation, will be available a few days after the webinar is completed. So that's it for the housekeeping. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce to you the Deputy Director of the World Trade Center St. Louis, Ms. Stella Sheehan. Stella has been with the World Trade Center for over 18 years, and she leads our trade team and is serving as our webmaster today as well. Stella also heads up our Executive Certificate in International Trade, which is our online export training. She oversees our 16 sister cities and is the executive producer of our signature event, Growing Global. Born and raised in Ireland, Stella has lived, worked, and studied extensively in international markets, including Belgium, France, Italy, and the UK. She holds a BA in French and Italian from the National University of Ireland in Galway, and an MA in Applied Languages for Business from the University of Ulster at Coleraine in Northern Ireland. And she's a graduate of Leadership St. Louis and also serves on the Missouri District Export Council. Stella will give a brief overview of World Trade Center St. Louis work and introduce our speaker. So over to you, Stella.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thanks for that gracious introduction. And thanks to all of you for joining us from a sizzling St. Louis for this very hot topic. I never did say the puns would be good. Today's event could not be more topical, and you're obviously of the same mindset, as it has generated quite a bit of interest among our attendees. No surprise, of course, with Canada and Mexico being two of our largest trading partners. As Susan mentioned, I lead the trade side of the house, and we like to say that the World Trade Center has three main pillars: people, trade, and investment. The three key equal ingredients which go into making a global city. The people side consists of our 16 sister cities, and perhaps our most well-known initiative, the St. Louis Mosaic Project, headed up by my colleague Suzanne Sierra. And that is an initiative to attract foreign-born to the region and assist them by way of programming and networking once they get here. The trade side provides companies with the tools they need to trade internationally by way of counseling, referrals to our federal and state partners, and organizing educational events like the one you're attending today. Last but certainly not least, our foreign direct investment, or FDI pillar, led by my colleague Sean Mullins, assists companies around the globe who may be interested in setting up their North American base in the St. Louis region, while simultaneously assisting the foreign companies who have already chosen St. Louis and wish to expand and continue to invest here. And now to the introduction of our speaker. I'm delighted to introduce Meredith Bond. Meredith is the director of the U.S. Commercial Service in Omaha, Nebraska. She has spent more than 25 years working with U.S. exporters to develop international marketing strategies, analyze market research, locate overseas business contacts, and solve export process problems. Meredith works closely with local trade development organizations and, of course, her commercial service colleagues worldwide to provide customized solutions for U.S. companies. Her areas of expertise include free trade agreements qualification, USMCA, of course, international marketing, export documentation, finding and screening global sales partners, trade shows, and international methods of payment. Meredith holds a Bachelor of Arts in International Relations and Affairs from Bucknell University and a Master of Arts in International Affairs from American University in Washington, D.C. Over to you, Meredith.
Thank you so much, Stella, and thank you to you as well, Susan, and the World Trade Center. I'm happy to join you today. You may recall, some of you may have tuned in about 5 years ago. I did a Rules of Origin training for the World Trade Center. That was recorded. It's still available on YouTube, and I might have gone through things a little bit more slowly that time. I am going to speed through some of these slides today. But I want you to know that you will get the slides to go through. So some of them are just for your reference so that you can look back on them, but you can also access that training from 2020. So let's dive into this. The benefits of free trade agreements, including USMCA, they are still a benefit. They're still going to set that base rate for any tariffs that you face going into a country. And as we are still in this negotiating period, a lot of our trading partners are still on their best behavior, trying to put their best foot forward. So if there are any deals to be made, we will make the best possible deal. Only Canada right now, of the countries where we have FTAs, has done a specific list of retaliation, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But they are still a benefit, and companies are still seeing that reduced or probably zero tariff going into a lot of these trading partners. I have a few slides here talking about the current situation, reciprocal and retaliatory tariffs. Using the president's language, the tariffs that the U.S. has put on our trading partners are the reciprocal side of tariffs, and retaliatory tariffs are what U.S. exporters are facing as they go to some of our trading partners. And as I mentioned, for the list of countries, and we'll take a look at that, where we have FTAs, right now I'm only aware of Canada that has a very specific list of where that's taking place. So my agency's focus is on U.S. exports, so a lot of this is going to be from that perspective, what are U.S. exporters facing, but I do have some resources for importers as well. That is where you can find the list that Canada has an extra 25% on right now. But again, that's on that base. If it qualifies for USMCA, you can't get around the 25%, but you're not starting at anything extra. If you were going in with a tariff, it would be 25% on top of that. So there is still a benefit for doing USMCA. China, we don't have an FTA with China, but they have put up probably the biggest retaliatory tariff on U.S. goods. And the European Union has talked about it, but nothing is in place at the moment. So these are some resources that you can use. Trade.gov is trying to, that's our website. That's where the federal government puts all its export related information. They are trying to kind of keep up on things to tell us, you know, what retaliations may have been in place. So it's not a lot of information on there right now, but that's where I will keep an eye out for any updated information. On the import side, these are a couple of private sector resources, one of which is the World Trade Center of Utah. So I'm sure a good friend of the St. Louis World Trade Center, where you can keep an eye on country by country what's going on for imports from those countries. Hush Blackwell is a law firm well known in the Midwest. I happen to have a district export council member, and I get their newsletter. I think it's really useful. And if you are an importer into the U.S., Customs and Border Protection has a really interesting daily email that you can sign up for that will talk about any changes and where you can find information. So those are some good resources to check out and bookmark. So FTAs, this is where we currently have FTAs. That list has not changed for quite some time. USMCA went into effect in 2020, but it was a new version of NAFTA that we've had since 1994. So a lot of these countries we've had FTAs with for quite some time, beginning in the late 80s. Israel was our first free trade agreement. We've added several, and I think the last one went into effect in something like 2012. So these are countries where we've had FTA partnerships for quite some time. How do you get the benefit? Again, the main reason people really look into this is to get that zero tariff rate going in if things qualify for the free trade agreement. So that's the whole purpose of rules of origin. Make sure your product qualifies under those rules. Once you do that, and that's the process we're going to talk about, then you need to let your customer know, hey, I've done my homework, it does qualify, and you can make that claim when you import my product. What is qualifying? This is a very key point. Just because your product is made in the US or shipped from the US doesn't necessarily mean that it qualifies. You have to show value added production materials that go into your product to really prove it is of the United States or of that little group of countries, trading bloc, to qualify for the FTA. And you'll know that based on the rule of origin for your product. It matters because the burden of proof is on you as the exporter, especially if you're the manufacturer, where you're in the best position to know what qualifies. You can be audited by the Foreign Customs Authority, and that does happen from time to time. Most of the audits I've heard about are from Canadian Customs, but all of our trading partners have the right to kind of audit your information, just like we have that same right to audit information of folks importing into the US to make sure that their claims are accurate. What if you go through this process, look up the rules of origin, but your product doesn't qualify? Can you still ship it to this FTA country? Of course you can, but you cannot claim any preferences or reduced tariffs under that free trade agreement. So you can still do trade, you can still sell to that country, you just can't claim any of those FTA benefits, which actually, if you take that one step further, none of this is required. If the burden to do this research is too much for you, you can look up to see what the tariff is anyway, and then make a calculation. Is it worth the savings you can pass on to your customer to do that research? So what do you need to look into establishing origin and to show that proof? You're going to need the rule. The rules are based on your harmonized system classification number. So we're starting with a big assumption, and that assumption is you have the correct HS number for your product. The HS number is what lets you look up the rule. So if you don't start with the right number, you're not looking at the right rule, and it's kind of a mess from there. So make sure you understand classification, make sure your product is classified correctly. Once you have that, you look up the rule, you're going to need to build some kind of bill of materials. What do you use to make your product? What goes into it? Where do you source it from? How is it classified? You might have to look at value. Different rules read in different ways, and we'll look at some examples of those. It certainly takes patience and time. You need to build all this information. You may need to go to different parts of the company to look that up. So there are kind of two different kinds of free trade agreements, two models. USMCA is kind of set the mark for the ones that you see on the left. And those are some of our larger trading partners, where there are two different ways to qualify for a lot of rules. It's either tariff shift or you're showing regional value content. And all the rules for the different products are different. You've got to look it up by HS number. The free trade agreement countries on the right kind of all follow one rule, looking at 35% of the appraised value. Sometimes there are rules for specific HS numbers, but more or less all products have to go by kind of the same rule and do the same value calculation. We don't get as many questions on those, but I did want to make sure that you had the formula. And this formula is going to look very familiar when we get to the USMCA and other FTA formulas later on. We're basically comparing the selling price to the stuff that you put into it, the materials, and seeing if you can exceed a certain percentage. So this will look familiar when we get to those later on. Where do you find these rules of origin? There are lots of different options, and I do have a recommendation. I put it as number one. The U.S. International Trade Commission publishes the harmonized tariff schedule of the U.S. Every year, and every year in January, there is a general notes chapter. What I do every January is download the PDF of the general notes chapter, and that contains the rules of origin for all of our free trade agreements that we have. So you need to look it up by HS number, make sure you're under the right FTA. And if there are any changes, because all these FTAs contain a process by which the countries can agree if something needs more clarification or maybe a rule needs to be changed, it's possible. It's not happening a lot, but it can happen. And that's where you would see the latest rule published. If you go to the USTR website, very useful to see the original text of the FTA, but it's possible, again, these FTAs were written over a decade ago. Sometimes the rule may have changed. So I would highly recommend downloading that general note at the beginning of every year. The Rules of Origin Facilitator is put out by the International Trade Center. Very useful if you are trying to look up agreements between countries that don't include the US. So if you have global production and you're saying, well, if I make it in Egypt and I ship it to Argentina, do they have any kind of a trade agreement? That will look up trade agreements between any two countries. So that's a useful link to have. Examples of rules, what do they look like? They all start to sound the same after a little while. You can see the ones in lighter blue are very short, a change to this from any other something, chapter, heading, subheading. Keep in mind, chapter is the first 2 digits of an HS number. Subheading or heading is the first 4 digits of an HS number, and subheading is the 6-digit level. That is the harmonized level of the classification system. As you may know, a US Schedule B number or US import number is going to be 10 digits. Only those first 6 are harmonized worldwide. So some of these rules are longer than others, but a longer rule isn't more complicated. It just gives you more options. So actually a longer rule can sometimes work out better. But you will see for a lot of products that you're going to get kind of the shorter version, what we call a tariff shift, where you're looking at the classification of the finished good and you're comparing that to the materials that go into it. So let's take a quick look at a very simple product. Doesn't have a lot of things that go into it, but the process is going to be the same. Even if your list of materials is 100 items long, it's the same process. We have our finished good. In this case, it's a beautiful ring. We know it's HS classification. We're shipping it to Korea. So we're going to look up in the US-Korea Free Trade Agreement, what is the rule of origin? And we find that it reads a change in heading to heading 7113 through 7118 from any heading outside that group. So again, heading is the 4-digit level. So what do we need to do? Just like with any product, we're going to build this bill of materials. This happens to be a simple one. We have sapphires and we have platinum. There's only 2 things besides our labor, but that's not an actual material that go into this ring. We do get credit for our labor, but that's going to end up being reflected in our sales price. But in this case, we are really just concerned about comparing what's the classification of the good compared to the materials that go into it. As you know, if you do know the HS system, you'll know that as you go through the system, kind of the higher number you get tends to be a more processed good. So it's really showing, hey, we took some raw materials and we turned them into this finished good. And the classification will tell you a little bit about how dramatic that shift was. So what we're going to need for this, we have 2 materials. We get the sapphires from Australia, and since we import them, we know their HS classification. We needed that number to do the import. It is 710391, and that 7103, we're worried about that 4-digit level, does not fall within the group that our rule excluded. So that's good. It comes from Australia, but that doesn't matter. Platinum, it comes from Canada. It is 7110. That also does not fall within that group that it has to come outside of. So even though 100% of the materials we use to make this ring are imported, not from Korea, and they're not US origin goods, we have changed it enough that when we look at the classification of the ring and we look at the rule, that we are proving our value added through that classification system, and it does qualify for the US Free Trade Agreement. I
Erin,
threw in just,
I
yes,
just want to hop in for a second, just because
absolutely.
your little grid of the bill of materials, I think there may be a transposition under
Oh, no.
supplier's HS code. So I just wanted on the recording. So it does, I don't think it matters because this is just an example, but it looks like you've got 7301 instead of 103, 7103.
Oh, you're correct. You're
Okay.
right. I do. Thank you. I will
No
note
worries.
that for future presentations. Excellent.
Okay.
I have notes printed, but they're very tiny, so
Okay,
I
great.
wouldn't catch it. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, you're just looking at what are the materials, where do they come from? If they're imported from outside that little family of the FTA, in this case, the little family is the US and Korea, and our materials do, but we change them enough that they do qualify. Now, I threw in a little note here. Does it matter that we have free trade agreements with Australia and Canada? Because we do. Not in this case. Free trade agreements are not interchangeable. So it does not matter in that case, but we still qualify because we've changed those materials enough. Let's take a look at another rule. This one's a little longer, but as I said, a longer rule just gives you more options. It happens to be for a flashlight. The A part of the rule probably looks familiar. It's that tariff shift that we talked about for the ring. You take some widgets that are classified under a certain heading, you change them into a flashlight, and then your flashlight has a different classification. The final product that you're making is something new and it's classified totally differently. So you might be able to qualify under that tariff shift. If you do, if you qualify under that first part of the rule, you can completely ignore the second part of the rule because of this magical little or right here. You can do the tariff shift, or if that doesn't work out for you, you can look at regional value content. So let's talk a little bit about regional value content. It's going to be a second option for you, and this is where you have to do the math and look at the values. And what you're really comparing is the value of what you sell this product for to the value of the materials that go into it, either originating or not originating, depending on which FTA it is and which options you have. But what they all come back to, and tariff shift really does too, is you are proving value added. You are proving that, hey, we put the labor, the design, the intellectual property, and the materials into making this here, and we can show that it really has US content and US value. We're not just buying something cheaply that we imported from a third country, putting a sticker on it, and then trying to pass it off as a made in the US type product. So it's to encourage you to add that value in the US and to source your materials with US suppliers or that FTA partner country. These are the formulas that you will see for USMCA, and these were exactly the same formulas that we had with NAFTA. So if you haven't updated in a few years, but you used to be very familiar with NAFTA, these will look very familiar to you. Transaction value is based on your selling price. What is the transaction value of the finished good? And then net cost is a little different. You'll see the formula is the same, but instead of using the selling price, you're using the net cost. And that is your net cost of production for that good. And there's a little information down here on what you can and can't include in your net cost. For subsequent FTAs that came after NAFTA, we have a couple different methods that we call the build-up method and the build-down method, and you'll see this in all of the other regional value content FTAs. The only difference between those two, again, we're starting with the selling price, but we're comparing in one method the total value of stuff that does originate, all the materials that are already originating. Let's just make that a shortcut and say US originating materials that you use to make your product. In the build down method, which is the same as USMCA's transaction value, you are taking out the non-originating materials total, and you're seeing what percentage of the good that is. But those are the two formulas you will see for all the other FTAs. Keep in mind for VNM, the value of non-originating materials, that's stuff that you know is imported from a third party country, or stuff you cannot prove its origin of one way or the other. It might be unknown or it doesn't qualify. It's got to be lumped into that value of non-originating materials. So again, kind of a quick example, and even though your product may be more complicated, the idea of how you'd go about this is the same. This happens to be for a chair. And again, it's got that A part and the B part. The A part is the tariff shift, would only be looking at the classifications of the materials compared to the chair. But if that didn't work out, we have regional value content as a second option. And I see transaction value method and net cost method. So I know this is USMCA because only USMCA uses that language for their two methods. So again, just like with the ring, we're building a bill of materials. What do we use to make this chair? What do we purchase from suppliers in our supply chain that we put in that? Wood, fabric, stuffing, springs and screws, things you would expect to make a chair. We fill in the HS numbers because again, tariff shift is usually the easier thing to take a look at first. But if we have to go on to regional value content, you would need to fill in the cost of each of those materials because we're going to have to compare that to our selling price, which in this case is $400. And we might need to know the origin because we might run that formula a couple of different ways. Again, if it's going, so this is USMCA, so US origin would count for us, Canadian origin would count and be good for us, and Mexican origin would be good and count in our favor when we go to run those numbers. So we're going to want to know where things come from if we can. Again, you might have some unknown things. Your supplier doesn't want to cooperate and track that down for you. So they may just have to be listed as unknown. Do the best you can, run the formulas and see how close you are. So there's always a shortcut where you can kind of assume nothing is originating. And that's a benefit if you can have it qualify that way, because then you can change your suppliers, you can change where things come from, and probably you're going to stay over that percentage line that you need to. So in this case, we weren't that lucky. We assumed none of the parts going into this chair are originating. We knew our total cost of parts was $229. We compare that with our $400 selling price, and we get to 42.75. We needed to exceed 60%, so that wasn't good enough. Second look at the product. Our wood, which is one of our most expensive materials going into this, comes from Canada. We can document that. We can prove it if we need to, so we don't have to include that $150. So our value of non-originating material goes all the way down to $79. We're still selling it for $400. We run that formula and we're at 80%. So we've easily exceeded that 60%. So sometimes that shortcut works out and that's great. Depending how close you are to this percentage, you may have to go back and requalify this every time you ship it. It really depends how close you are, but it always depends on that selling price, and your selling price may change. It depends on the cost of your materials. Certainly your costs may change. So you may have to revisit this for different customers as you make shipments, but depending how close you are to the line will tell you how often you may have to do that. Claiming the preference for the free trade agreement. You've done you knew your HS number, you looked up your rule, you either ran the tariff shift process or you ran the regional value content and your product qualifies. Great news for you, great news for your customer. They're going to pay less. Now you've got to let them know. How do you do that? It used to be that we had specific certificates for a lot of our FTAs. We no longer have a specific certificate that is required for any of our free trade agreements. That's what the agreements say. In practice, that may be different. You may get a form from your customer saying, this is the form I need for customs in my country. And that's okay. You can really do it in whatever format you like, as long as you provide the information that's required under that FTA. So you do assume the responsibility for the data. You're letting them know, hey, it meets the rule. Somebody is going to have to sign it. That's required for all of them. And you must maintain the records of all that information you use to come up with the calculation. That is 5 years. The record keeping requirement for all our FTAs are 5 years. The burden of proof is on you, although the importer, if that's your customer, is probably going to face questions first. And the first thing they'll do probably is come running back to you. So make sure you know what you're signing, make sure you have that proof and can provide it to them. And you do keep that for 5 years. So keep in mind also, when we say certificates of origin, and there is no specific certificate, and these are not the certificates of origin that you would do through a chamber of commerce. It's a different process. These are all self-certifying documents. You've done the research. You are making the claim as the producer or seller of the good. U.S. Customs does have an interesting template that you can download from their website. It's very odd. It's a PDF, a fillable PDF, but if you try to open it, it'll tell you there's no document. So you have to follow these instructions, right-click it, save it, and then open it in Adobe Acrobat, and then it does work, I promise you. It's a little strange how you have to do that, but you'll have these slides. That is the link, and that is how you would get the certificate if you want to use their template, which has all those elements that all the FTAs ask for. Specifically for USMCA, this is from the Documenting Origin chapter in USMCA, and these are all things that are going to sound very familiar. Who are you? Who are you selling it to? Who is the producer? The importer, if you know it and are willing to share it. And a lot of these, just like in NAFTA, some of them can be available to customs upon request. If you don't want your customer to know who the producer was, if it's not you, that is an acceptable answer. You've got to have the HS number. And then what it all comes down to is number 7, the criteria under which the good meets the originating requirements. And that is, it qualifies under the rules of origin. You can even put the rule of origin in if you want. You can do a blanket period up to 12 months, just like you could with NAFTA, which helps a lot, again, if you have identical shipments going again and again to this buyer. But again, keep in mind, depending how you qualified it and how close to the line it might be, you may need to re-examine it if you think you might go back and forth against, well, this is going to qualify, but if my non-originating materials really go up in cost and I don't change the price, it's a percentage. So it's all looking at those numbers. And then someone is going to have to sign it and date it. And that is the person who is probably going to get the first phone call from that foreign customs authority if they have a question. So make sure the person signing it knows what they are doing. I'm happy to move on to questions after we have our next speaker, but I just wanted to let you know I threw in a few more slides. This is my contact information. I do have a colleague, Warren Anderson, in St. Louis, who would also be happy to talk to you. These are some of the services that we do. We talk to companies all day about exporting and where they are in the process. Do they need any matchmaking assistance? And then this is that newsletter that I mentioned. It's the National Association of District Export Councils. It came out on July 7th, which was kind of the first deadline for these reciprocal trade agreements to make deals by. And I thought it was a really good summary on how they, what the status is right now, which again, we're still in a little bit of limbo because it got pushed to August 1st. But you can go to the National Association of District Export Councils websites, and I think anyone can sign up for their newsletter. I don't think you have to be a DEC member, but I wanted you to have that as well. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn that back to you for now, Stella, but I will stick around if we have questions at the end, or Susan.
Yep, it's coming back to me, but thank you very much.
Great.
Gosh, every time you present, and it's just chock full of information. And I think you do a very good job of explaining things. So yes, you went faster than back in 2018 or 2020, whenever it was. And when for the audience, when we send out the follow-up with recording and everything, we'll be sure to include the link to our YouTube channel that has that original webinar on it too, because she dives into a lot more detail on how to get the origin. So we will get into Q&A, but first we want to bring on our special guest. He works with a company that's a longtime World Trade Center member, and they've been a very knowledgeable partner for customs compliance and international shipping. And so with all the fluidity going on regarding tariffs, we thought it'd be helpful to hear, what's been happening, especially along the US-Mexico border. And yes, trade is still certainly happening. So Caleb Hall is a licensed customs broker, and he is the director of U.S. Customs Brokerage for Scarborough Global, and he has worked there for over 11 years. Scarborough is based in Kansas City, but they have got an office in St. Louis as well. So we will put in the contact info for Scarborough, for Caleb, and for also our St. Louis connection, Dylan Frillman. And then it was good to know that they've got 3 offices along the Mexican border, and then they've got an office in Ontario, Canada. So Caleb, thanks for joining us. What do you know? What are you seeing? How can you add to our discussion today?
Absolutely. Thanks, Susan. And thank you very much, Meredith, for the just ton of information that you relayed on free trade agreements there. That was all super great information. I'm excited to be a part of this. So as Susan noted, we do have 3 offices along the southern border with Mexico, and we also have that Canadian trade office up in Ontario. So we do have a lot of experience right now with the free trade agreements and with all of the tariffs that have been flying around. So I guess I get to be kind of the boots on the ground expert here. So I appreciate that opportunity. Kind of 3 main topics I want to talk about. I don't have any slides for my section. We're just going to kind of roll through this, and then we can open it up to Q&A after I'm finished. I want to start with kind of the interplay between the free trade agreements and the tariffs, because that's probably the #1 question that we get whenever somebody is importing from Canada or Mexico or any other country. And that's, do the free trade agreements with those various countries come into play with these IEEPA tariffs, the Section 232, anything along those lines? The short answer is sometimes yes and sometimes no. So USMCA is actually the only free trade agreement that is specifically referenced in any of these new tariffs that have come out since March. The ones that it most directly affects are the IEEPA tariffs, the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, shorten it to IEEPA. That one is the fentanyl branch of that is the one that is most directly affected by USMCA. If your goods qualify for USMCA, they are exempt from that IEEPA fentanyl tariff. The other one that is most directly affected is the Section 232 for automotive parts. So if your goods are on the list of items that are subject to Section 232 for the automotive parts, and they are actually automotive parts, but they qualify for USMCA, they do thankfully get exempted from those additional Section 232 tariffs of, I believe they're still at 25% on the automotive parts. I don't think those went up to 50. The 2 that do not, unfortunately, get affected as much are the Section 232 for steel and aluminum. You don't get an exemption for USMCA on those. And then the IEEPA reciprocal tariffs don't technically have an exemption for USMCA. However, if your goods are made in Mexico or Canada, currently they are already exempted from IEEPA simply because of their status as Canadian or Mexican origin. I understand that there is a lot that's supposed to change here on 8/1, so we're all kind of waiting with bated breath for that. There's just a lot of things that have been changing, and a lot of the things that were put in place that were paused. It sounds like the administration is trying to put some things back in place. Unfortunately, a lot of the things that have been talked about, there's not any official information on, so we're really kind of riding on how everything has gone so far. So be in contact with your brokers, make sure you're following trade representatives, making sure that you're contacting everybody that you can to find out what's going to happen on 8/1, because that information, if it follows the same pattern as all of the other tariffs that have happened, is probably going to kind of wait until the 11th hour to have formal details, and then everybody gets to scramble and make sure that they are complying as much as possible. So in terms of the actual effect on border trade, this has been such a massive, I'll say the word upheaval. There's some positives that have come from it, but there's been a lot of upheaval from these tariffs on the borders. Many companies that we work with that are used to paying absolutely no tariffs are suddenly having to shell out 50, sometimes up to 75% tariffs, depending on what products they're bringing in, whether they qualify for free trade agreements or not. That comes into play, obviously. And then obviously the big change has been a massive spike in the automotive market between the tariff on automotive parts and automobiles themselves. So a lot of our clients have actually gotten accustomed to paying no duties and tariffs at all, simply because the items that they imported had a 0% duty rate. It just mattered before. The downside to that is they've never actually even looked at filing for a free trade agreement, which is where the information that Meredith has supplied here becomes so important. It is possible for you to figure out the free trade agreement information without having to employ an astrophysicist who's really good at math. You really can get that narrowed down as long as you know your costs and your origins. So that is a great tool. I appreciate the information that she's provided. We've seen a lot of success from our clients in getting their items qualified for USMCA quickly. The nice thing about USMCA is that it's a tariff agreement that, as long as you can back up the information that you're supplying, you don't have to file to get approved for USMCA or anything like that. You just have to be able to prove that it qualifies when you import it if you experience a CF28 or a CF29. And those are just requests for information from customs. That's a lot of what might seem like negative aspects. And I know that there's a lot of change going on, but there is actually good news that comes from this. And I want to make sure that we're all focusing on that, because what comes from all of this is there's just so much more collaboration now than there used to be. So the first thing is that importers are becoming so much more familiar with their own products and processes. If anybody on this call is a customs broker or a freight forwarder, you probably work with some clients that they really rely wholly on you to be their source of truth for most things, because they just want to import something and they want to make sure that it's done compliantly, and they lean heavily on you to do that. Brokers are limited in their ability to do that because of the fact that they don't have a direct line to suppliers. What's happening with USMCA certification is that importers are becoming much more familiar with their suppliers and their supply chain. They're more familiar with what percentage of their goods are made in certain countries. It's really increasing importers' knowledge of exactly what goes into their product. And that also increases the ability for them to share that knowledge with others, and creates better knowledge just across the board for where do the things that come into the United States actually come from? How are they put together? Where does this get pieced together? It's not as simple a lot of the times as simply saying assembled in the USA means made in the USA, because most of us know most cars are, even if they're assembled in the USA, most of those components didn't get made in the USA, and it's just a matter of transparency a lot of the time. So importers are becoming much more familiar with that side of things. And the other great thing about this is it's drastically increasing the communication and the collaboration with other countries. We have a lot of clients that in the past, they've had a very transactional relationship with their suppliers. I'm purchasing this from you, I'm paying you a certain dollar amount, and then we're moving down the road, and then I'm selling it in the US. What's happening here is you're starting to see relationships build between importers and suppliers where they're saying, hey, we're all feeling a lot of pain from this. I'm paying out tariffs on top of what I was expecting. You're getting a lot of pushback in terms of being able to prove what's happening. It's actually creating a much tighter relationship with importers and suppliers in all of this, which is a great thing to see, because right now there's obviously plenty of divisiveness going on. It's great to see something like this actually cause some positive benefits. It's a little harder to focus on the positives in all of this sometimes. And I just want to make sure that we really zero in on the fact that there's some great things that are happening. And anybody who is importing into the United States, I just encourage you to lean into that. Lean on the partnerships that you've built. Lean on your suppliers, lean on your brokers, lean on your freight forwarders, because ultimately we are all in this together, and we have to help each other through these trademark trying times, unprecedented times, whatever you want to call them. We're all in it together, and we just have to help each other out as much as possible. So I do want to kick it back over to Susan and go ahead and start any Q&As that we might have.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. I really like those positives that you mentioned, because I think they're true, and hadn't really thought about those things. So appreciate ending on a positive note. You know, our goal here at the World Trade Center is to encourage more exporting, because that will boost our economy. So and you mentioned things on the importing side, but exporting, importing, you know, it's all good. And you know, if we develop those relationships globally, I think that's great too. So thank you very much for that. And so we've got both of you staying on camera for the Q&A. A reminder to everyone that you can put your questions in that Q&A button at the bottom sort of right side of your screen. I did try to resist jumping in, Meredith, because I had several questions as you were going. But one question that might be for both of you, can somebody sort of send you their calculations and have you verify whether or not they're accurate? I know that's a bit of a trick question.
I'm certainly happy to take a look, especially if somebody has taken a first stab at it. That's great. You know, do I kind of agree with the process? So I can provide some advice on that. I will also say, ultimately, if you have a question, there is an advanced ruling option for any of our FTAs if you want to ask that foreign customs authority to take a look at what you've done. Like if you've been shipping, and sometimes they let it through, but sometimes they don't, because depending on who's reviewing it, maybe they believe you. That is an option, but remember, once it gets put in writing by them, that you're stuck with whatever that decision is. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to review it to see if it makes sense, or if there's any red flags that don't seem to make sense.
For sure. And it's the same thing for us. So I don't want to make this into a commercial for Scarborough, but we do have an entire consulting division that really is an expert in determining the validity of USMCA claims and things along those lines. So if you have that breakdown of the RVC and things like that, and you say, hey, I just want to make sure that my items qualify for whatever free trade agreement, we're happy to dig into the language of the free trade agreement, make sure that the things that you're saying match up to that. And if not, help you understand why not, so that maybe you can find a path forward to still claim the free trade agreement.
Okay, great. So, but then I do want to make sure, so ultimately it's still, the liability still rests with the exporter, with the manufacturer, right? But
they're in the best position to make that claim. If it's a U.S. export, if they don't have any assets in that foreign country, there's not a lot that can happen to them other than maybe their future shipments are blocked. The importer could get fined, you know, the country can go after them. Hopefully it's not a matter of like willful lying. That's a whole different thing.
Right, that's a whole different thing, right?
But yeah, the U.S. exporter the manufacturer especially is in the best position to provide that information, and the importer should make the claim based on that information.
And then on the importing into the U.S. side, the importer of record is liable for pretty much everything on the import side in the U.S. So if you are making that free trade agreement claim, then you are going to be held responsible if it does not actually qualify, and you will get hit with the additional duties and taxes. And as Meredith referenced, if there's any suspicion of, you know, willful negligence or anything like that, you could be facing penalties. So just make sure that you're leaning on your partners and double checking your information.
Great, Thank you. Thank you. Excuse me. So we do have a question from one of our friends at the Department of Agriculture in Missouri. It appears like the U.S. trade relationships are changing, and she's wondering if Caleb or maybe Meredith, you would also have some thoughts on this. Comment on what markets the U.S. is focusing on, and if you're noticing any new relationships being established.
For sure.
Well, we're hearing about deals have been made, but we haven't really seen a lot of details on what that means. But still, that's a positive development. Deals have been made. There will be details, we hope. And really just kind of keep up with the news. Where have those been announced for? So sometimes our trading partners are coming back saying, really, we have a deal? I think that happened with India recently. They're like, we made a deal. So yeah,
For sure.
there's a lot of detail to come, but the administration is certainly interested in negotiating new access points and making those as broad as possible.
Absolutely. And to just kind of mirror what Meredith said, we have heard of a lot of deals. The biggest one that had a question mark hanging over it for a long time, and it still kind of does, is that initial deal that was made with the UK a couple of months back, where we said, hey, we struck a deal with the UK, all of these steel tariffs are going to go away. And then we kind of sat twiddling our thumbs waiting for that to actually happen. What actually eventually happened was when the steel tariffs went up to 50%, the UK stayed at 25%. So they did kind of get a 25% discount, so to speak, on that. But like Meredith said, we're pending a lot of details from a lot of these trade deals that have happened. And that's kind of what I was referencing earlier. The pattern for most of these changes, whether it's implementation of new deals, implementations of new tariffs, we're all kind of sitting back waiting for the details until just a couple of days until they're supposed to go into effect. The hard part as an importer or an exporter is that makes it really hard to plan. If you are running a company, you have to be able to price your goods. That's a big struggle that our importers have had, is making sure that they're not going to lose out on money just because we couldn't necessarily make up our minds quickly on how a deal went. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. In terms of actual trade relationships, there are some who are concerned about our trade relationship with Canada and Mexico as being two of our biggest trade partners, and obviously geographically our biggest neighbors. They are concerned that we're damaging trade relationships with them. But as you'll see, every time one of these comes out, they're the first ones to get an exemption. Section 232, originally they had exemptions. IEPA, they got exemptions very quickly as long as the items qualified for USMCA. If you think about it from a political standpoint, President Trump did sign USMCA into law during his first term, so he does have a stake in making sure that stays in place and it doesn't get jeopardized. It's just a matter of whether that continues to benefit all of those countries, as we do see a lot of shifts in that.
Great. Yep. Well, maybe this is a good time to ask one of my prepared questions here. What resources is best for checking on the latest tariffs that U.S. goods face in any other country? I don't know if you
I have one. There is a free resource on trade.gov. It's a partnership with Descartes. It's the Customs Info Tariff Lookup Tool. And I did check it against one of those Canada 25% HS numbers, and it was up there. They say, I tried to research how often they do it. They say within 48 hours they're updating it, and I did see it recorded as like extra US tariffs, I think is how it listed it. So they have started to add those in. So for a free resource, that's the one that I am looking at. But I imagine if you're working with a great freight forwarder like Scarborough, they can help look that up for you, or you may have tools through their system that can help you look that up too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's an abundance of free resources. We always encourage our clients to keep educated as much as possible. One of the things that I use as a quick reference, there's a great customs attorney, one of the best ones in the country, Sandler, Travis, and Rosenberg. They have a great resource page for every single one of these trade remedies that have been issued on the import side. So they have one for Section 232, 301, IEEPA fentanyl, IEEPA reciprocal. It's really kind of a one-stop shop. It's what I rely on a lot of the time. Your partners, your brokers, your freight forwarders also likely have paid resources that they use, that they can access and kind of spread that information over to you. So I'm just going to keep beating it over the head. Rely on your partners, because partnership is huge right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great suggestions, and we will include those in the follow-up then too, Caleb. You can get us that info. Some of our local resources that we use is Thompson Coburn. We've got a trade compliance attorney he's based in DC, but Thompson Coburn is based here. They've also got, it sounds like, a similar resource that they update very regularly. And then we also work closely with Armstrong Teasdale's compliance attorneys as well. So there's a lot of support out there. Yep. And then, so we're getting a little, probably near the end of the Q&A period, but I did just want to ask, this is this is a very specific question, and those who already know how to do this may already know the answer to this, but when you're calculating those costs, Meredith, are you just including, like, what is the price that you're putting in there? Is it just the list price of the product? Or it's not including like shipping or anything like that, right?
We could spend an hour talking about valuation, but the simple answer is what you paid for it, or what your customer is paying for what you're selling them. There are all kinds of scenarios where it might not have a sales value, and then there's kind of a list in order you can fall back in. But it's usually what you paid for it or what somebody's paying for it from you.
Great. All right. Thanks. And that's probably a good time to mention that I think both you, Caleb Scarborough, is available, and also the U.S. Commercial Service, and locally here it's Warren Anderson. But you all are willing to do these, at least initial consultations without setting up a fee or anything like that, right? So
correct.
Anybody that's got very specific questions, we encourage you to reach out to both of these very well-versed people and the other people within their organization. So thanks very much to both of you. It was just so informative and very helpful. We will send the follow-up shortly. And so now I just want to take a couple moments here to talk about some of our upcoming events that we have going. I'm going to get to my script here to make sure I get all the info here. So the next Engage in Trade, this is our monthly speaker series. The next Engage in Trade is going to be a semi-annual global economic outlook, which this year is going to be presented by one of our member companies, the Bank of America. And it will likely be on the third week of August. We're still finalizing that date, but they'll be taking an international sort of look across the globe and telling us what they see. So stay tuned for that. And if you're not already receiving our email invitations, you can go to the main page of our website, which is worldtradecenter-stl.com, and go down the lower right side. You can sign up for our email newsletter. And then our biggest event of the year that we get very excited about is our 26th annual Growing Global Luncheon. We've got a terrific panel to discuss this year's theme of Africa Rising. Our event has sold out the last several years, so I'm sure you want to make sure that you don't miss that. Sponsorships are open at this point, and it's going to be taking place on Wednesday, September 24th at the Ritz-Carlton in Clayton from 11 to 1:30 p.m. Engage in Trade takes a little break during September because we want to focus on that Growing Global Luncheon. And then back in October, we'll be focusing on Manufacturing Month. So we hope you'll join us for all of those things. Just wanted to let you know too that at the conclusion of this webinar, a survey will appear in your browser. We would appreciate your feedback on this presentation, and then your thoughts on any future topics that you would find helpful. And so thank you again very much to our speakers, and for everyone who has joined us. We wish you all a wonderful week, and this concludes our webinar. Thank you.